First up, it's Rachel Parris. Please proceed to the podium at a pace of your choosing.
Thank you very much. So I hail from a well-known city called Leicester. We're well known for our cathedral, our historic market, and the fact that we absolutely hate the scum from Derbyshire. It's fair to say that Leicester has also had its share of notable residents, so much so that a little while ago, the local newspaper, the Leicester Mercury, published the following article: the 100 most famous people from Leicestershire. But one name was notably missing, which was mine, Rachel Sarah Parris, just to remind you. But rather than be justifiably pissed off, it just inspired me to write a song all about Leicester and the 100+ people from there who were apparently more famous than me. So that's what my round's going to be. During the song, I'll stop and I'll ask you 5 Leicester-related questions. So take it away, me. Oh, thank you. And Gokwan, Red Cheese, the Elephant Man, Lisa Lashes, Graham Chapman, David Attenborough, John Tickle, Una Stubbs, Pork Pies, the Charlotte Pub, Peter Shilton, Walker's Crisps, Gary Lineker. They all come from Leicester. They're from mighty Leicester, and I'm gonna test you on them. I also come from Leicester, but I'm not obsessed. It's just a Leicester test. There's also David Icke, Manish Bhasin, Lady Jane, the 9-Day Queen, Stephen Frears, Shawadi Wadi, Gary Lineker. Appeared on Match of the Day in August 2016 wearing just a pair of boxer shorts. But why? Why do you think Gary Lineker was in his pants in 2016? Johnny, have you got an answer?
Yeah, I think it's because he lost a public bet he made over Leicester winning the league.
And Sophie, what do you think?
I thought he'd probably just got really ripped.
And you, Richard?
I put either he'd had a breakdown or he was being held hostage.
And this is Leicester, so...
Maybe by another pundit.
I can reveal now that Gary was in his pants because Leicester won the league, so he was celebrating.
Okay.
But also, I would have accepted because he wanted to, and that's the kind of power that he wields. So that's a point for you, Johnny. Willie Thorne, Sue Townsend, Thomas Cook and Kevin Friend, King Richard III buried under a car park. But within a margin of 100 years, when did Richard III die? When did Richard III die? Within a margin of 100 years. OK, Johnny, what was your answer?
Mine was the 17th century.
Sophie, what have you put?
I put a really specific date, but I don't think it's correct.
All right.
1792?
OK. Richard, what do you think?
1485. Oh. Final answer.
Richard III died in 1485.
Yes.
Wow.
So... A-level history specialising in the Tudors.
I just never want to make love to someone and go, and by the way, you know who died in 1485?
That's not necessarily one of your go-to moves, is it?
There's never a wrong time to mention Tudor history.
OK. National Space Centre, ER's Parminder Nagra, Mark Morrison, who created Return of the Mac, Bradgate Park, Joe Orton, Daniel Lambert, Massive Man, Golden Mile, De Montfort Hall and half of Basement Jacks. They all come from Leicester. They're from mighty Leicester, and I'm gonna test you on them. St Margaret's Bus Station, Gary Lineker again. In 1996, Walkers released Salt and Lineker flavour crisps. But which England footballer refused a similar name-based endorsement? He said, no, I don't want that.
Can I get a point for successfully naming a footballer?
Not officially, but in my head, yes.
OK.
And we're going to come to you, Johnny.
I've just put Posh Spice's husband.
We'll leave it at that, Posh Spice's husband. Sophie, do you know his name?
Yeah, I do. I'd written David Beckham.
What about you, Richard?
Pele. was the main one I put. And then John Barnes, who my father very much liked as a footballer, and seemed like a pretty decent chap.
The answer was, in fact, David Beckham.
Oh.
So... David Beckham did not want his own flavour of crisp. Any ideas on what the possible flavour was going to be?
Speck ham?
Cheese and Beckham.
It was Smoky Beckham.
Smokey Beckham. Yeah.
Do you see what they
Okay.
did? But he said no, not
Yes.
good enough.
You don't want to sound like you've just emerged from a fire.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a point for Johnny and a point for Sophie, and nothing for you.
OK.
Betty Driver was famous for serving which dish while landlady of the Rovers returning Corrie? Which dish? Betty Driver, Corrie. OK, Johnny, what did you put for this?
Hot pot with happy ending as option.
Sophie, what was your answer?
I don't know a lot about Betty Driver's cooking, so I said the dish she served was probably a saucer. I should go with cups of tea.
I see. What about you, Richard?
Blood soup. Which is very similar to blood.
It was, of course, Betty's hot pot. It was the speciality dish at the Rovers returning. So a point for Johnny.
And can I stress a happy ending was a napkin?
John Deacon, Granby Hall, Sam Bailey, The New Walk, Engelbert, Humperdinck, Gary Lineker, the actor Richard Armitage, Cheese and Gary Lineker, Walker's Crisps, Gary Lineker, Gary Lineker. Gary Lineker once shat himself during an Italian 90 World Cup game against Ireland. But what I want to know is, how many pounds are there in a kilo?
Why is this specifically Leicester?
It's just the kind of thing you need to know if you're
From Leicester?
from Leicester, yeah.
A lot of conversions going on there.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Johnny, what's your answer?
I put £1,000 or the 100.
I like
I
hedging
kind
your
of
bets.
hedged my bets.
You've got to stick to one of them, Johnny. We're going to make you choose.
All right, I'm going for 1,000.
OK. Sophie?
I normally measure things in grams, but 12?
12.
Have you ever bought apples? Has anyone here bought apples?
In pounds?
Yeah.
Pounds of apples?
Yeah.
What have you put then, Richard?
2.2, Rachel. 2.2. How many pounds are in a kilo? What kind of animals are on the show?
I can reveal, I think you know, the answer is 2.2 pounds in a kilo.
Thank you.
That's a point for you, Richard, obviously.
Some of us in show business still do the shopping.
OK. They all come from Leicester. They're from mighty Leicester, and I'm gonna test you on them. I also come from Leicester, but I'm not obsessed. That was my Leicester test.